What's the name of the show?
Welcome to another edition of Within WordPress podcast. On this show today, we have Mario Peshev. Mario, can you please introduce yourself a little bit to everyone not familiar with you?
Hey, Ramkos. First off, thanks for having me. My intro is pretty hybrid. I tend to adapt myself to different situations, and I've done so over the past 20-something years. I built my first static website back in 1999. Since then, I transitioned to freelancer, WordPress developer, consultant, digital consultant, business advisor, serial entrepreneur, and a bunch of different things. I'm well known with founding DevriX, top 20 WordPress agency worldwide, some 13 years ago. And
Yep.
I've been dealing with a lot of other crazy stuff in between. And something that people don't know is that about 10 or 11 years ago, I was asking you some questions like, what's the meaning of management and how does marketing work and so forth. So I can attribute some of that glory to yourself personally. I can probably find some email threads back in the day.
That's funny. I'd forgotten that. Yeah. Yeah, we
Well,
go back a little while.
no way. It's probably, 12 years, give or take? Maybe more.
Probably. Yeah.
Time
Yeah.
flies. Let's say you were younger, so it's just as much.
I was younger, and but I look better now. I feel better now, and I'm trying to see the positive side of getting older. But yeah, so you've been. I would say you you're sort of underselling yourself because you're quite active inside of a lot of different things in the WordPress community. Though DevriX is your company, but you do a lot more in terms of content and stuff you put out there on Twitter, and I think you publish at Forbes and what are some other
I
venues?
I have a column in Forbes and Entrepreneur and a few other places that are not as popular, and they also have lots of content across Inc. Magazine,
Yeah,
Business.com, Small Business Insights, and
right.
a
So
bunch of.
you're quite prolific in the type of content you pump out. Um, One of the things that I found very interesting in, in the stuff that you put out there was a tweet not too long ago about it's hard to capsulate it in one sentence, but roughly the challenges e-commerce has in our space, whether that is Woo, whether that is BigCommerce, whether that is Shopify, or there's a lot happening in that space, in that market, from layoffs to innovations to AI and everything in between. And you most certainly seem to have an opinion about it. So let's start with the first question. So you are servicing clients, and what kind of e-commerce solutions are you using for your clients?
Sure. So DevriX is primarily a WordPress agency, and the main thing we sell are WordPress retainers. However, the way we structure that is WordPress, retainers for businesses primarily using WordPress, and business consultancy and technical partnerships for businesses primarily using WordPress. That doesn't mean that everything we do is WordPress. We have different platforms with microservices, with tools written in Go, in Python, some deployment automation tools in Ruby, and so on and so on and so on. So we have, for instance, we have some publishers running their main publishing website in WordPress, and then running a commerce in BigCommerce or Shopify, or sometimes it's kind of a self-hosted thing like OpenCart or so. And we are managing or maintaining a portion of that stuff. So it's a pretty diverse mix, especially with larger brands. That and that's probably something that many people outside of the WordPress community don't know is, but the larger the business, the more diverse their technical stack.
For sure.
Like one example is we work with, one of the largest, the most popular screencasting software for tutorials and like video tutorials and that kind of stuff. They have like over 30 million installs. Their main tool set, their main website is in ASP.NET, but their entire like blogging network is kind of WordPress, right? Same goes for Microsoft. Microsoft and Skype's blogs are in WordPress. We don't manage them, but just as an example, are in WordPress, even though Microsoft has invented C# and the .NET framework, right? So that level of diversity gives us access and insights and intel into lots of different tools and systems. And we've also worked closely with some clients that specialize in these ecosystems as well.
Yeah. So if there's a sort of a mix that you can define, like how much are you touching WooCommerce versus other stuff? Is there?
I'd say that WooCommerce is probably leading the charts. Shopify is next. And then there's kind of a mix of like other systems from Magento and OpenCart through BigCommerce through any other like self-driven type of thing.
Yeah. I'm always intrigued by companies focusing on multiple tech stacks at the same time, which sounds like is what you're doing. So how is that? How do you find clients that are? No, let me rephrase. How do the clients pick you when their tech stack is so diverse? It's not necessarily a WordPress company. How do you make yourself stand out? So like, this is the extra thing that we're doing. Nobody else does it. This is why you pick us. How does that happen?
Sure. So first off, I want to draw the line between just offering multiple things by default versus offering WordPress solutions. We actually do the latter, but building a strong technical relationship and trust and partnership with a client usually exposes us to other tools and systems they have. So it's usually the other way around, so to speak. We definitely don't advertise ourselves as like a BPO. Like that's we cannot afford that. We are, I know, like 45 people or something. I don't know, and we like it's unrealistic to provide the level of expertise and multiple people for every stack and that kind of stuff, right?
I would think so. Yeah. Hence the question.
Well, so we don't promote that per se, and that's again. So it's a two-folded question. The first part is we normally sign a client with our WordPress expertise. They love the way we work, we communicate, we plan, we strategize, and they work with 30 different agencies for different things they use. So sometimes, we take over their marketing work. Sometimes we take over their .NET platform or their, Go microservices or something out there, AWS infrastructure. And that's kind of how we, take over certain pieces of the stack. So that's first and foremost, that's kind of the execution road forward. And second, in terms of expertise, the fact that we specialize in high scale, high profile solutions means that it's necessary for us to work with engineers, and engineers are rarely constrained to a single stack. They normally do, mobile apps in Android or Objective-C, or they build their own tools in Python because it connects better to TensorFlow for AI, or they do Python again for machine learning. So like there are different solutions solved better or kind of getting more adoption with different tools, and that's kind of how you get exposure to that. Like one example is like Shopify is one of the tools. Like Shopify is in Ruby on Rails, and it's a completely different infrastructure. But we used Capistrano for deployments 11 years ago. Capistrano is also Ruby driven, so some of our deployment systems are in Ruby, and people who have been building deployment tools and recipes for a while are very well versed in Ruby, and they've also taken courses and so forth. So like normally we have people with additional expertise, and those people interested in just exploring new tech and spending, like splitting their time between different technologies.
Right. Yeah. So that makes sense. I understand better now how that works, because I think in a way that's how it works for most. I think you are probably focusing more diverse compared to others. So the tweet that you send out, that I'll add it to the description of this podcast. But the tweet that you send out was you mentioning a few things happening in I'm tempted to call it big commerce, but that's also one of the providers. But like in the larger scale of e-commerce, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? There's AI, there's obviously a recession going on. Can you give me your highlight of where you think what's happening in e-commerce that you find the most threatening? What's really something we should worry about?
That's a pretty broad and complex question, but let me. I'm going to take it a step back and just provide some context. So,
sure.
First off, back when we decided as an agency to focus on WordPress, my background was in engineering, and my background was in Java enterprise development, right? Talking about telecoms and banks and that kind of stuff. So, penetrating the WordPress space was only possible for me to step up and focus on the high scale solutions. I was not competitive for low cost websites. I was not fast. Like, my expertise was in solving very complex problems. So that's kind of what I focused on. And later on, as we kept scaling, this inevitably led to high scale websites and high transactional websites. In most cases, we were talking about publishers, especially ad revenue. This is kind of one of our specializations is publishers with hundreds of millions of page views generating revenue from ads. So we do have ad ops department and stuff. And the other one is e-commerce, right? So money making systems on top of WordPress. So that's kind of how we entered the WordPress market. Then again, some of our clients were not publishers for commerce, but they also have other commerce systems. And we've also worked with some that are in the commerce space, but indirectly. One of the common examples is I spent a year and a half as a CTO of BrainJolt, a California-based startup. I just left 3 months ago or so, but I'm still in an advisory role and working day to day with them. So they are one of the largest Amazon affiliate publishers. So they are a publisher, but their revenue comes from affiliate products on Amazon, right? So that's how I gained a lot of exposure to Amazon directly and their business model, their rate cards, and a lot of stuff happening in their ecosystem. So with that in mind, I'm also working closely with a Shopify app that I'm partially managing myself in, again, the Shopify space with many thousands of clients. So this really gives me a kind of broader sense of things. Now, as to what's happening in the space, the more conversations I have, the harder it is to actually get a clear picture of how much of that is speculation, how much of that is just a market push, how much of that is investors squeezing businesses to reset and just focus on profitability versus what's happening in the real world. Now, in my experience to date, at least speaking in May of 2023, even though it's been roughly a year since the recession has begun to unfold, it's still fairly well balanced. Sales are still either going up or stable, and it's hard to see any proof of the space struggling. We're talking about Amazon GMV and reported GMV for Q1. We're talking about generic, Shopify sales. We're talking about our customers and them growing revenue in different departments and in different areas. Now, there are, however, different interpretations for that because GMV goes up, gross merchandise value is going up, but also inflation has increased costs for certain products about 20% on average, right? So you may actually decrease sales by 15%, but prices up 20%, and you're still growing.
And you're still good,
Yeah. So it's important to dive deeper into data in order to figure out what's happening. At the same time, we see layoffs. I lost, my dear colleagues and partners got laid off from Amazon and Shopify, and we see just yesterday Shopify had another layoff of 20% of their staff, including some of their top engineers. And we see that's happening. Amazon is probably allegedly planning another layoff. So there's definitely movement in the space. What's about to happen and what's actually happening on the scale side is yet to unfold, I think.
Yeah. So layoffs is a good indicator of something something happening. I don't always see that as an example of something bad necessarily. I think it's oftentimes used by companies as a sort of a culling, sort of a
Yeah.
mechanism. I'll give you an example. I've worked at a large company many moons ago, where it was declared that there was going to be 1,000 people laid off. And I happened to know that the normal flow of people, and that was going to happen in a year. And I happened to know that the normal flow of people leaving the company was about 1,000 people per year. So I was like, why are you announcing something that is naturally going to happen anyway? But they wanted to let go of 2,000 in total. So it's a
Right.
there's a little bit of marketing and optimization happening as well. And I think the recession, as we're seeing it, for however it is noticeable, is also being misused here, because I think that's just something naturally happening. But here's a conclusion. With what you're saying, it almost sounds like using one of the hosted solutions is probably more of a challenge than using something native inside of WordPress. So WooCommerce, for instance.
Well, that this may or may not be true. I actually had a few conversations with, well, again, I'm going to take it a step back. So first off, DevriX partners up with several hosting providers, but we have our largest clients are hosted with Pagely. And Pagely got sold to GoDaddy, and ever since we've also been exporting their hosted kind of commerce solution, right? We
Yep.
also have customers who we've migrated off of Liquid Web, and again, no harm or anything to Liquid Web, just again, that's kind of the turn of events. And their e-commerce solution, I think it was Nexus or so.
Yep.
We have tested out like WP Engine and their offering. So there are different versions and variants of hosted WordPress and hosted WooCommerce in that particular case.
Yeah.
And one of the news that broke maybe a couple weeks ago is that WooCommerce is actively working on Woo Experts, I believe, which is their hosted WooCommerce experience.
Yeah.
And I got in touch. Well, they kind of connected with me, some of the Woo Experts folks building the system to gain some insight on what's happening on the other side of the fence. And we've been having conversations and back and forth of what makes some of the hosted platforms competitive. And again,
Yep.
most of my, I wouldn't say income, but most of my net worth comes from WordPress, and I'm still biased in that. However, I'm also trying to stay objective as to what's happening on the other side of the fence, right? We've lost clients as an agency to Webflow.
Yep.
It sucks, but in some cases, I can see how this may be an okay solution for a customer. In some cases,
Yeah.
it's merely marketing, but in some cases, it's well, Webflow makes more sense for you, right? So these no-code or hosted solutions, they also have some perks. And one example I'm going to give is one of the pains of being a plugin developer or a theme developer in WordPress is the limitation of the marketplace, the inability to sell through the marketplace, the
Yeah.
public one, unless you're on Theme Forest. That's really painful. The lack of insights of what's happening in other tools. You may have a diagnostic step in your plugin, but you still need to ask your client to send it. You still have no idea who your client is whatsoever when they install your plugin. And that's absolutely ruining businesses. If you go
Yeah.
to the Shopify side, the moment someone installs your app, first off, you probably are going to receive payment because it's completely legit and legal to get payments for your solution. You can also charge subscription based or volume based on sales and orders. You get access to who your client is, what's the store, when did they sign up, how old the
You
store
have
is,
a
what Shopify plan they have, how many apps and which apps they're using, what integrations for different cases
yeah.
like email marketing and so forth, how many orders and what's the volume of sales over the past 30 days.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that's a treasure of information versus what you get from WordPress. Correct.
yeah, literally, you can build a myriad of businesses on competitive platforms just due to that information. That's utterly, completely impossible with. And the reason I'm sharing that is because it's public information. Like the moment you have an
Yep.
app or a theme, you can see that, and that's what I share with experts. I'm like, this is the ecosystem that's going to build WooCommerce, plugin extension, whatever developers and theme developers, and to incentivize them to grow that part of the market, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's an interesting one. So I'm translating this to essentially meaning, yes, it may make a lot of sense to, yes, go with your owning your own data, have your own store, um, WordPress, WooCommerce, and you can scale it and you can do whatever you like with it. There is just one big difference between that and a hosted solution like Shopify. You have zero data to base on, to base any decision on what to do with your product or how to optimize, or what even succeeds and why. Yeah, that's an interesting point of view. That's why I enjoy having this conversation with you, Mario, because I like your point of views. I like that you take a step back and look at the larger thing, because that is essentially what the content you're sharing is also always about, and that's a smart approach to. And I guess it also is because you, like you've said before, you've sort of detached yourself from WordPress itself. Yes, it's the main tool you work with, your company does, but there's more in this world than just WordPress. And on that note, I there's a lot of folks that want to solve everything inside of WordPress, and if it's a small paying client, maybe you need to, maybe that is the way to go. But there's most certainly a case for where you're using different systems alongside WordPress, but it doesn't make sense to cramp everything in there that you can possibly think of. So what is a thing that a client suggested that you had to push back on, like, no, we're absolutely not doing this in WordPress?
So I mean, that's another great question. There are specific things, and I've actually been documenting part of that journey on my own blog. And I know I have specific examples for that on my own blog. I know that one of the systems is a video hosting platform, right? If I need to rebuild YouTube, I would never use WordPress.
No.
It makes no sense. Like, I need to think of what does the CMS include and kind of what's the core stack. So it is a content management system, and the video is content.
Sure.
But you also have comments, you have tools, you have pages, like lots of things you're not going to use. You have different users. You're probably not going to have roles, or maybe just, I don't know, admin, video uploader or something. The UI, like the dashboard, is going to be different. You can't control role. It's counter. You're going to use very, very few aspects of WordPress for a video hosting platform. That's why I don't think it's a good idea. But when you think of, let's say, a TripAdvisor or so, well, it is a listing of journeys. It is a list of events. When you think of any other, listing space, WordPress is a great fit, right? So it's more about, hey, if I build on top of WordPress, how much time I'm going to save from just using custom post types and taxonomies and the user roles and permissions and the baked-in admin panel, and when creating a new type, being able to do some stuff, how many external integrations I'm going to need that I'm going to be easily connecting with a plugin and so forth. So I guess this is kind of the key thing. But one of the most important answers here is that times change and things change. And the more we, I'm not going to say age, the more the wiser we get.
That's a nice workaround.
Of course, we understand that there are ups and downs, and life is kind of moving in mysterious ways. So one example for that is because you said, like, in some cases it doesn't make sense cramping everything in one system. You can decouple, and I'm working with a business right now that's trying to get everything modular, microservices, and different tools. And the Amazon cost is staggering. It's pretty high, and we've been going back and forth. It's really hard to rebuild anything that's in production, so it's kind of a painful approach. And just the other day, I saw Amazon Prime, I believe, publishing a study that they went from a decoupled modular system to a monolith, kind of a single core fat application, and they saved 90% of their AWS costs. Amazon saved 90% of their AWS costs by moving it to a single app, right? And I was like, well, that's one example of adhering to best engineering practices in the real world probably makes sense, but understanding that the real world is probably hosted on a cloud like AWS or Google Cloud
Yeah.
means that this may actually cost 10 times more expensive just because of how computing power and instances up and running and
Yeah.
vertical scaling works, right? And yeah, I mean, it just that level of curiosity for me, just trying to understand the space and what's moving how is begging different questions of like, should we do that or not? And one
Yeah.
example is we used to think in building horizontal systems, right? You need 4 web servers, 2 database servers, load balancer, blah blah blah. Now you can go to a mage host and say, okay, I'm not going to pay $1,000, I'm going to pay $2,000, and I'm going to solve all that problems with one instance in the cloud.
Yeah.
And it's just a different mentality nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great example of you always need to think about it smart. Like it's not a given. It's not necessarily a bad thing to want to cluster everything in WordPress, but the mindset where it becomes a forced thing. I have to do this in WordPress because WordPress. That's never a good one. But I'm still mulling over the 90% reducing. That is huge.
Yeah.
So out of curiosity, that you do a lot with Amazon, specifically AWS, or like what are the services you tend to use a lot inside of the Amazon ecosphere?
Well, again, it's broad. We use different things. I mean, we also we host some things on Cloudways ourselves, and they got
Yeah.
acquired by DigitalOcean. We have like maybe 30 droplets from DigitalOcean for different micro tools that we have. We do a lot of stuff on the agency side with BigQuery
Okay.
because we spend some time on data engineering and data analytics and some data science. So BigQuery does really well with that. It can be hooked to Google Data Studio, which is now Looker Studio. And we also do a lot of that. AWS is kind of traditional in setting up EC2 instances with RDS for like some applications. Also, Pagely is a managed Amazon host. So that's why we kind of dive between different systems. And yeah, that's kind of on the infrastructure end of things. And the other part is, again, when we do some stuff for Amazon in particular, as to integrations for Amazon and so forth, you naturally tend to lean to their cloud ecosystem.
Yeah. Are you using Cloudflare in
Yeah.
some of their innovative new ways like R2 and they have their forgot the name, but they have a solution for their database as well?
We mostly use, we have different Cloudflare plans, including enterprise accounts with them for certain things. In most cases, it's, Cloudflare workers. We use them heavily for reverse proxies and all that.
Maybe explain a little bit what a Cloudflare worker is, because I think the vast majority of people listening have no clue what that is.
Well, it is a script that you can kind of run on the fly as an intermediate layer that's doing some things on your behalf before the user request. Well, after the user request, before actually rendering the page.
Yeah,
so
before it hits the server.
Exactly. It could be pretty instrumental to changing certain behaviors of your website, including introducing context, understanding where you're coming from, introducing localization, or rendering different ads or different services, or even rendering completely different pages based on that. Additionally, it allows for loading different systems, including different sites on a subdirectory, which is pretty hard to do on a hosting level in kind of most cases. A lot of the web application firewall is pretty powerful and resilient. The CDN is pretty robust and broad, so it handles quite a lot of load. There's image optimization tools like Broadly that you can embed. I mean, it's a pretty diverse ecosystem. I don't claim I'm an expert in all that, but it solves a lot of problems for us. For like, hey, let's detach these scripts on the fly and improve performance, or let's contextualize and understand what's that customer, where they're coming from, where should we point them real time.
So your stacks are in that regard as multifaceted and layered as they can be, from WordPress to the different types of tools that are working alongside WordPress, but also on the stack that you are either on EC2 or combined with Cloudflare and everything. So the reason I'm asking is like, so how do you maintain? You said you have about 45 folks working with you. How do you maintain the level of knowledge within such a large and diverse of systems that you're using?
I don't pretend to know everything. I have general knowledge of a lot of things.
Hmm.
I read, I work with the people working on projects. I try to fill in some gaps by reviewing what people have done and how. I also touch base with other people in the ecosystem, like other agencies or other businesses, figuring out what they do and how they do in order to figure out which tools make sense or services and which don't. So it's
Yeah.
kind of an aggregated knowledge of, hey, I've done that myself for over a decade, and then I've been building teams doing that for another decade and more.
So how do you make sure the team understands what you understand? Like, or like if two engineers are working on a project and they set up this particular combination of all the tools, how do you make sure that two other engineers that are working on a different project that end up using I don't know, half of those tools are using the same type of best practices and stuff?
Well, in reality, I probably fail half of the time, but it's just impossible to scale in reality, right?
Yeah.
It's mostly, I mean, it's kind of a combination of aggregated knowledge, right? I mean, it's public information of what other people are working on. You can review a stack. Like there are other people, like we have a CTO in house, we have two technical leads. So,
Yep.
people in charge of transferring that knowledge horizontally and making sure that people are aware of what we can use and kind of what's the best tool forward. For specific projects, I'm also involved, like especially kind of building a long-term roadmap or like a 3-month plan of like what are we going to do, or the migration. We just do broader meetings with more people, like, hey, what's the
Yeah.
best service we can use, or like, hey, does it make sense migrating to that? So in most cases, we try to both document and expose that knowledge publicly and have other people who coordinate that work among people. In
Hmm.
lots of cases, I'm personally involved myself in just high-level strategy meetings. But again, it's not like communication doesn't get lost in the way, right? We probably use, I
No,
know,
no, of
5
course.
different quiz plugins, or I know, I'm going to say slider plugins, but we don't do sliders. But you get the point. Like there's more
Yeah.
optimization that would happen for sure, but we're focusing on the high impact initiatives.
Yeah, yeah. You don't do sliders. I wonder why.
Because of the great user experience.
Yeah. Because of the high interaction and engagement you see
All the love
measurably.
of users.
Yeah, yeah. If you're not aware and you're listening to this and you go like, "What's wrong with sliders?" There's a Nielsen study years ago which essentially says that anybody thinking folks interact with sliders on your website is what, 1% of the total
Yeah,
audience,
something like that.
something
Yeah.
like that. It's ridiculously low.
Yeah.
So, and okay, I have a different question. You work with a very broad sense of understanding tech. Um, if we're bringing that back to WordPress, what are the things you're most excited about that is inside of WordPress now? Like what excites you to still work with WordPress after all these years?
Honestly, nothing new whatsoever. I like what excited me 5 years ago is still here, and that's
Which
definitely a
is,
problem. Well, it's just the resilience of the system,
yeah,
the ability to scale like specific markets and segments like publishing, how hard it is to take over that market share by anyone just because of the broad plugin adoption and demo adoption
yeah,
and that kind of
yeah.
stuff. But again, the problem is that the problems I was having 5 years ago are still here. And
Like
in
what
the
kind of
meantime,
problems?
I mean, it is pretty broad, endless list. I mean, where
Don't be
should I?
shy.
Nah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not. It's not like I'm hiding anything from anyone or something.
No.
So
But like, give me three examples of stuff that you're
I
referring
can
to here.
I can do my top 30.
Yeah.
So the Quarter admin panel is just horrible. It's the dashboard from like 20. from 2006, it should be changed ASAP. Like it's just unfriendly. People hate it. It's one of the top three reasons why people avoid WordPress for a new website or a build. It's just like, nope, that's too complicated. So that should go. Certain tools, just as links disappeared as a core component many years ago, I believe that
Yeah.
most menus should disappear, like tools, comments,
Menus should disappear.
perhaps. I mean, like the WordPress admin dashboard, the left admin bar, right?
Oh, okay.
Just
Yeah, the menu itself. Yeah.
tools. Like who
Yeah.
needs tools? Like just no. Who goes to tools unless you want to export or import some content? No.
You probably do it once.
Exactly. And you can just put it as a link under settings as everything
Yeah.
else. Comments, I don't think we use comments actively, and that's been the case for years. Even if you do, it's probably a plugin territory and lots of other cases, right? The editorial experience, Gutenberg is accessibility problems. That's a major one. Mapping what you see in the back end to what you see in the front end is just, nope, it's completely different. All the patterns and kits and everything else going on, they just don't work as advertised. You can import something as a kit and it looks nothing alike, and that's a major problem, unlike what you see in any other hosted system whatsoever. Like you just set up a site, a page, it just works pronto. So these are some of the kind of key components. The adoption of new users, back in the day, bloggers were the people who were blogging actively on WordPress, and then bloggers become people in companies and they introduce WordPress either on the tech side or become marketing managers and directors, and they bring WordPress. Now, who's bringing WordPress to the workplace? I don't think that anyone is. And I think State of the Word or so that I listened to Matt, and I mean, that's one of the common questions, like what do we do for kids who are supposed to be the next WordPress adopters? Because well, we're building Tumblr. And I'm like, First
that's
off,
not really answering the question.
Yeah. First off, I've never really seen a real person in real life using Tumblr. I know there are tens of millions of people.
I know about a handful. There are some, but yeah.
Please, I need an introduction to someone using Tumblr. But like literally, I don't know a single person using. I'm not kidding. I mean, I may be living in a bubble. I just don't. And that's a problem. Like if I see kids are using TikTok, using Snapchat, YouTube, Instagram. I get that, like, or whatever, right? I've never seen anyone using Tumblr. That's just the fact. And that's oddly concerning. If the future of WordPress and adoption of kids is Tumblr needs to step up their game for sure. And lots of this, but yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, Matt has indicated that he wanted to move Tumblr to be fully WordPress based. I don't know where that is in terms of intent and timeline and stuff, but is that something that would solve it if we're, or so? Yeah, is that something that is changing the future?
I actually thought that it's already mostly on WordPress, but it's not. So I guess you're behind on.
Maybe I am behind. I don't know.
No. I thought it already migrated, but I'm just looking on there. No, actually, Tumblr.com says it's running on WordPress. Yeah, maybe it is on. It's probably on WordPress already. Yeah, I think it's on WordPress already.
Then I have missed that, but
so
that will solve some of the problem.
Yeah, but to your point of how is that changing, you need to ask some of the people who have used Tumblr, because I just don't know them.
I need to get somebody from Tumblr on the podcast, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, that's actually going to be helpful, because again, I mean, I understand if people get excited about WordPress, but we've also seen, hey, Twitter sucks, let's go to Mastodon. How many people are using Mastodon now, right? Like it's you pick up a
new
wave.
Management will always prompt those types of movements, but so
the founder of Wikipedia, I believe, created WT Social, as in like a free Wikipedia or something like that, or another social network several years ago. I signed up. It was even a paid system, and it died, right? So lots of attempts, but not a lot of successful ones.
No. You're touching on a point that's been raised in this podcast a few more times. How do we get new users inside of WordPress, and not just users but developers and such? Are you seeing that becoming a difficult thing to do, finding folks that know how to code inside of WordPress or are not running away from it at the same time?
Well, personally, I've been having troubles finding PHP developers for probably 8 years now. That's one thing.
Yeah,
Now, one may argue that WordPress is a lot more JavaScript. I would say that it's still, I don't know, 30% JavaScript perhaps now
yeah,
or so, but
yeah.
it's just not primarily JavaScript. We need to be realistic about that.
Hmm.
So that has been a growing problem. WordPress and Laravel are the two systems, and maybe Symfony and Zen, but I'm not really sure, are the system that are keeping PHP alive for the most part. But it's just not
Yep,
a trendy language. So first off, we have an advertising issue with PHP, because the way it works is you bring developers to the workspace by incentivizing schools and universities to teach programming language. That
yeah,
incentivization normally happens by Oracle and Microsoft going to universities and saying we have a gazillion jobs opening and
yeah.
partnerships and stuff.
And they're not talking
So
about PHP.
yes, because again, Oracle owns Java and Microsoft owns
Yep,
C Sharp, and that's what you normally see in high schools and universities because they're highly progressive jobs, or the trendy things like Python, due to the fact that AI has a pretty decent adoption on Python systems.
yeah,
And Python is fine, but there's no community or so whatever anything incentivizing universities and schools to teach more PHP, right? And that's a problem for the technical adoption. That's one thing. WordPress and Laravel are not doing a lot for teaching PHP whatsoever. I mean, Laravel is, but it's not large enough for the community. So that's
no,
one problem on the technical end. Then you have the user end. Now, I firmly believe that most people and our audience, like our persona, is actually 35 to 45, 50 years old marketing managers slash directors who start a new job over the past 3 to 6 months. So they're new
yeah,
on a job in a small team of themselves and maybe one other person, high expectations to achieve both short term and long term. They need an entire team assembled. They can't hire 6 people, unrealistic, but they have a budget for 80, 100 hour retainer on our end to build everything for them and keep them
yeah,
growing and flowing, right? So our audience being the new adopters of WordPress are normally 35 to 45, means that people 25 and younger normally, I mean, they're not necessarily management yet, but they're not normally exposed to WordPress in the same way. They're not former bloggers,
correct.
or if they are, they go to, again, Webflow or Wix or Squarespace or Weebly or any other tool that also does blogging, or they're just on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and they think that blogging is Instagram captions, which is
Yeah,
actually a thing. Lots of people do that, and it's
I'm.
scary, but they do.
Don't get me started on that one. That's never made any sense in my head.
Yeah,
It's
I mean, no,
non-indexable. It's not. You can't find it. There's no formatting, nothing.
I've
But
the
yeah, that's a solid point.
And the more I go, the more I like extracted myself out of the WordPress bubble, I see that people are like, "Why are you even blogging? Like, what? Why does that make sense?" I'm like,
Yeah,
well, my tweet will disappear next week, but my post copying over my long tweet is going to be here for the next 6 years. See
yeah,
the difference? Like the business that I get is not from the tweet; it's from the tweet making itself immortal and
yeah,
then
yeah, yeah,
combining with 200
yeah.
other tweets. Like that's the difference we're talking about here. But people don't
So
get it.
So would you agree that we can sort of say that the rise of other social media platforms such as Twitter, and then the features that Twitter starts, especially now in 2023, the new features that we're seeing, like longer text and all that, would you agree that that's a thing that you could say is starting to threat WordPress?
Mm, Take a look at the WordPress market share. It's been flat for the past, I think, 2 years. Now, it used to be growing 2 to 3% a year,
Yeah,
and then it reached
it's
about
flattening.
40. Yeah, and it reached 44 point something percent. Now it's 43.1 or so, right? So it's been flat for the past 2 years, even slightly declining. Now,
Hmm.
my explanation again is there are no people to bring WordPress to the workplace, and also large numbers means that WordPress has broad adoption for, because like .NET and Java probably have, I know, 1% market share, but they own enterprises.
Yeah.
So the revenue generated from them is 100 times what WordPress generates. So we also need to make a difference. But looking into a dipping market share means that new users and starter websites are not built on WordPress. They're actually built on Webflow or other
Yeah.
tools if websites are
Well,
built at all.
whatever is hip. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the Super Bowl, they had another ad of Squarespace, if I'm not mistaken. So
Possibly I missed that, but
yeah, they
yeah,
had one. They had one several years ago with Keanu Reeves,
I
and they
remember
had
that one.
one now with I forgot the actor's name, but it was also like the Mr. Smith type of situation. So they're making that popular for people watching Super Bowl, and Super Bowl is something that people watch with their kids because it's a big enough of an event, and they have
Yeah.
I mean, lots of things happening there.
So it's not the social media changes, it's what is the thing that is holding us back then? Why are we seeing this happening? Because it can't be just the exposure in large media campaigns, or is it? Is that the problem we're seeing?
It's many problems. Once again, social media definitely facilitates that. People are communicating
Yeah.
quickly, more rapidly, and getting information there. I think like Google just announced, and that's due to OpenAI, but Google's traffic dipped as well. It may be 1 or 2%, but it's a major thing. So kids are
Yeah.
not Googling as much. We also need to be aware of that. They are searching on TikTok, which is a fact. TikTok is a search engine now.
I know.
Um,
I know. It's crazy.
yeah, yeah. And there's also advertising because we don't see WordPress advertising whatsoever. There's the technical adoption of people building solutions for WordPress. There's the reluctancy to the WordPress ecosystem to promote paid themes and plugins. Now, again, a premium Shopify theme is about $250 to $300, right?
Hmm.
It's not a fortune, but it's still 5 times more expensive than most TeamForest teams, right? So it
Yeah.
makes sense when it's hosted on their marketplace. It makes sense to promote that. And when you take a look at WordPress.com, it's fine to buy premium themes there, but it's not on WordPress.org. So I understand it's free and community and stuff. I'm not saying that WordPress should be all premium. No, don't get me wrong. But there's no chance to develop a thriving ecosystem of indies and
Yeah.
agencies and small shops if
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah.
prevent them from monetizing.
So you're essentially saying it's a multifaceted beast of uh, problems, which altogether culminate in the fact of we're not seeing growth because we're not growing, because we're not helping um, from onboarding to understanding to innovating to like the whole thing. There's so how much of a problem is that? Like, are you experiencing it in a negative form other than observing the fact?
Personally, again, we work on high profile systems, meaning that normally sites that have been up and running for 6, 7, 8 years, right?
Yeah,
So we, even if that happens, we're still going to be 5 years behind or more. Similarly
right.
to banks still use COBOL and Fortran, right?
Yeah,
They died 40 years ago, but I mean, there's still systems written that. So personally, I'm not necessarily experiencing that besides hiring, right? Hiring is just a problem.
yeah,
But yeah, it is. I believe it's the old adage of death by a thousand cuts. You
yeah.
can't kill one system that owns 44% of the universe with one thing. Like you can't slap it with a lawsuit. It's open source. You can't tax it so that it sucks. So it is a death by a thousand cuts. It needs to be approached by lots of competitors, tackling different segments, each one grabbing a
Interesting.
little bit, introducing something that's a little better, and all of them kind of uniting themselves around that for the most part.
Hmm.
That's what I think is happening. And again, when I take a look, Webflow is not. I mean, not. I'm not. I kind of get Webflow, but Wix and Squarespace and Weebly, they don't look bad. They're simplified. Lots of themes. Themes actually look like what's advertised. Have you seen the WordPress
Yeah,
theme
yeah, yeah,
space? It
yeah,
sucks. It's boring. You don't get templates there. They're not accepted. The review process hasn't changed in 12 years. And
yeah.
yeah, if I had the magic wand of like just being the Josefa of WordPress, I would change a lot of things, and they're not going to harm any open source users. It's just going to be, here's the vetted space of premium themes and plugins. Like totally fine. Like use all the freebies you got, but there's a premium. Oh, by the way, there's an enterprise tier because guess what? Shopify has a Shopify Plus or Pro Plus that starts at $2,000 a month, right? So they say there's the $9 a month or 19 or whatever, but there's the 2,000 plus. So we have a completely different marketplace for you guys. They're vetted. They go through review, rigorous review process. They get badges for that. They have compliance issues
Well,
and blah blah blah.
there's money for it as well. If you if you're charging that type of money, you can hire people to actually do the vetting and stuff, and
Precisely.
it doesn't need to fully resolve on the availability of either people fully volunteering or automatic in most cases, footing the bill for the employment in those areas. Yeah.
Is it though? How much of the team review process is automatic? I'm not sure. How much
No,
of the plugin review
not team
process?
review itself, but the whole maintenance of .org.
Well,
As far as I know,
it's not quite open source. I mean, it's allegedly open source. It's just exposed some pieces of the product that are
yeah,
created
no,
by Automatic.
I'm not specifically referring to the software itself, but the domain, the site, and everything that goes with it. As far as I know, that is for the most part serviced by either folks from Audrey Capital, which is Matt's investment company, as well as Automatic, and for the rest, a handful of volunteers. And I may be off here in the exact metrics, but your point of these are the things that we need to change if we're going to make this a successful thing. I think they're very valid points. I think we are in a time where the whole, including commercial entities and methods and ways onto .org is definitely not hurting the open source principle that's behind it. I think you make a very good point there. Very valid.
I think if you try to segment the key market players in the web space, and it's hard because they're not exactly by revenue or post size or anything like that, but I would say roughly speaking, right? You have e-commerce, you have publishing as actual publishers, then you have small starter websites, portfolio websites and blogs, then you have the enterprise systems like what Java and .NET systems normally do. Then you have hosted systems, right? So if you take a look at that broader scope, and there are other aspects and segments here, like the government space, which is Drupal, for example, works well with. But so publishing space, WordPress still dominates. All right, cool. E-commerce space, dubious. WooCommerce has pros and cons, works fine, not quite. There's also Shopify and BigCommerce and all the other stuff. So it still has some ownership, but not exactly, because Shopify has 4.5 million stores. So just as context, that's kind of important. And they're actually generating revenue. So shopping space, all right. Small blogs and portfolios and 5-page websites. Webflow, Wix, Squarespace, and whatever it is, Weebly, and other systems, they are crushing it there. There are tools like Card with 2 or 3 hours, I'm not sure, popping up and like, yep, you have a site like $9 a month, hosted, web, pretty, template, blah, 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 right? Lots of these systems eating that small space. Then you have the high enterprise space where you see, well, we have ISO compliance and 17 other types of compliances that you're not necessarily passing, or open source seems hacky because we read security reports all the freaking time. And also the PHP stack doesn't make sense because you're either Microsoft-backed corporation with, ISO licenses, or Java kind of ran Oracle organization with Oracle. So enterprise space not very well served. Then the hosted space, like again, the Shopify's and Webflows, it's hosted WordPress besides WordPress.com, which I don't find very appealing, or that new e-commerce system that are evolving now, like Woo Experts. So what I'm saying is, when you take a look at the main markets, you see a lot of clear competition, maybe even doing better and growing faster. And that should be ringing some bells in the right places from where I stand, at least.
Yeah. I probably need to digest it a little bit more and do my own research in this, in the broad sense of the topics that you touch. But From my gut feeling, I'm saying you're right. You're making a strong case of why this this year is the year to pivot, to change. I
There
may not
are,
pivot. Pivot is a big word, but change into a direction where growth is the first thought instead of an afterthought.
I even think that there are some ecosystems that weren't even available previously, and now they are. So on the one hand, we have communities. Yes, we have BuddyPress and maybe BuddyBalls. We manage some of these sites, but you also have
Yeah,
circle communities and Kitchen.co and others that
yeah,
are
yeah,
doing
yeah.
pretty well
Yeah.
and pretty resilient and stable and so forth.
Circle
Notifications,
is
all
a
that.
great example of a community.
It is, yep, yep.
Yeah,
So this is one example of underserved communities that we never really got adoption to, and we can. Another example is actual web apps with actual web experience. And looking into Bubble, Bubble
yeah.
is now they had some pricing issues. They just 10x prices and stuff. So
I
that's
think they
a
still
different
have that
story.
pricing issue. Yeah,
I mean, but they're probably going to normalize, and they have 18
yeah,
months transition period. But
yeah,
so Bobo, you can actually build extremely beautiful charts and wizards and like next, outstanding look and feel with no code, like something that I
yeah,
cannot achieve in WordPress without lots of custom work at the office. I cannot
yeah.
achieve that.
I agree.
We've actually had that comment for Webflow. Like, yeah, how do you do with transitions and animations and like the parallaxes of like one component
Yeah,
moving as you keep scrolling? They're like, it's a default in Webflow. It's like you just drag it there, and
yeah,
it's like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So it's well, we don't. So Bubble is one thing, and even if it's not Bubble, there's Softer and there's
Graphic.
Framer, or like a bunch of these other tools that are no code and again cost
Yeah,
like $15 a month with hosting, and you can build yourself and connect to Airtable, which is free, and have a database which is free
yeah.
online.
It's crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy what you can do with no code or low code, whatever.
Yeah, and that's the thing of, yeah, we are using WordPress. I still prefer that the businesses that we are serving and stuff is WordPress, but like who's sleeping on what's actually happening over the past, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, right?
Yeah, yeah. Interesting.
And
So
again, just as a kind of side note, that's not to say WordPress is dying. Next year there's no WordPress. That's not the case.
I was going
WordPress,
to say,
yeah, the second largest CMS or so has like 2% market share, and WordPress has 43. There's a
yeah,
pretty broad gap out there, right? But we
yeah. We
need
can
to
be
work
dying
as a
for 30
community.
years and they still wouldn't have caught up.
Exactly. But it's almost like the global warming, right? It's happening, but it's happening in like 200 years. So
Yeah.
we there's a lot we can do. There's time for us to do the right thing, but we also need to work a lot more as a community to step up and just be work together towards solving most of these problems. And it's kind of a sense of apathy or like solo player attitude right now going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was going to ask you an ending question, but you asked it yourself and answered it yourself already. What is the
What's happening
positive
with
note?
WordPress?
Yeah. What is the positive note here? What are the, so as a final question, what are the things to focus on if you are inside the WordPress bubble and you want to explore the possibilities the world presents? Like what are your two, just two, what are your two biggest tips that you can give people?
You can't limit me to two, but so
Okay, I
the
can
the
try.
two, the two things. Okay, the two things. Okay, the two things are, first off, WordPress is a great framework. I just think it's not advertised as such. And Matt
Mm,
tried to do that many years ago, like WordPress transition from a
it's an
blogging
app.
platform to a CMS to an application framework, right?
Yeah.
So there's a reason why headless web applications often built on top of WordPress, because you like, if you're a publisher, great platform. If you're, again, lots of uses for WordPress as a content entry backend system,
Hmm.
just not necessarily fast enough or flexible enough for the front end. So considering that WordPress may take different shapes and forms over the next years is a great tip, especially if you learn JavaScript deeply or whatever.
Yeah.
And just accept that you may end up connecting lots of different tools and systems, as a headless app, as a React app on top of WordPress and all that. That's kind of the one thing. And the second thing is there are still some strives to make WordPress better, like Gutenberg. If Gutenberg works, it's perfect. It just doesn't, and it's been 5 years. Or the full site editing. Theoretically, again, if it works, technically you drag something and you edit it and it's actually there and it saves and it doesn't overwrite itself, great. So some of these things may really wipe out some of that self-code market. So those are the two things. And again, keep in mind that many of these competitive businesses are funded startups. So they work with money thrown out of thin air and from the sky. And now money is kind of over for a while. That's why tools like Bubble introduced 10x pricing changes and so forth. So we may see a
Glide
shift in
as
some
well.
of these businesses. Yep.
Glide is also doing that thing. Yeah.
So
those are two good tips. Those are two good tips. And I think you've shared a lot of insight in from a very different perspective than most people inside the WordPress ecosphere. And I want to thank you for that. I appreciated you jumping on. Taking the time of booking, what was it, the equivalent of 3 meetings in your calendar today?
Something like that, 3 to 4, 3 meetings in the gap, and the 30-minute gap.
Yeah. So most excellent. Thank you, Mario. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks again for having me, and let's meet next time with 50% market share, okay?
Let's go for that.